Dave here from Base Stencil. We're going to paint this stencil of Taylor Swift. Now, I'm not a huge fan of the music, but I think this is a pretty good stencil and it's pretty popular. So I'm gonna kind of play around with it, and I'm gonna paint it twice. The first time I'm just gonna paint it exactly the way it comes out of the box, exactly the way you would cut it on your craft cutter or laser cutter, and then I'm gonna try a little bit of something different with it to show you what the versatility is of a stencil that's actually a pretty good stencilized version of this image. Let's get started with the first version, which is just going to be painting it right out of the box. So you can see what we're doing. We're just building up the tones. We're building white to light gray to dark gray to black. And this is basically painting this like it's a black and white photo. Now, the original photo is not a black and white photo, but in the stencilization process, unless you have like one super bright color, which usually doesn't happen when you're using skin tones and that sort of thing, and hair color and stuff like that, then you don't have a super bright color to tune into. So we're painting this basically like it's a black and white photograph, and we'll change that up in a little bit. So here will be the darker mid-tone layer, and you notice how I'm registering this thing because it's a little hard to tell exactly. If you tried to freehand this and you tried to place it exactly where you thought it went, it might be a little tough. So it's even tougher in virtual stencil land because everything is super jittery. But these registration marks help you to know that you've got these eyes, these dark parts of these eyes lined up exactly where they should be. So I recommend using the registration marks when you're at all not certain about where the stencil should go. Okay, I think this is a great rendition of a black and white photo. It looks like a photo. It looks like a card on the wall, right? But you know, when you make a stencil, you try to make the best use you can of the space, because you don't want to have a stencil with a bunch of blank space in it, because you have to carry that thing around, and the blank space is just blank space. That's why you crop it to the edge of the figure every time, like you crop it to the area of interest. But because this is cropped right at the top of her head, this makes it look like kind of an awkward postcard. It's like a postcard where you went just right to the top of the head. So what we want to do in general is not make postcard stencils, but to make stencils where we can leave out one layer and let the background come into the image. We're going to do that in this case. And I'm going to paint a little bit of background first. That's going to be a light colored background that's going to support the way this image builds towards the center, towards the darkness in the center. And I'm also going to leave room to come back with this white stencil and actually use the white stencil to paint in this part of her face, which I know to be white flesh colored. And I'm going to put, when I say white flesh colored, I mean white person flesh colored. And then this part of the arm, this part of the arm, and this part of the arm. So I'm going to use the white stencil to do that. But I'm not going to come back and I'm not going to paint this part. I'm not going to paint this part, because painting this part makes you have a square. And I don't want a squared off thing. I want something that looks a little bit more organic, where the stencil actually, the color of the stencil comes in from the surface into the stencil itself. Okay, let's try that. Okay, so there's my crazy background, and I've done better backgrounds, but I'm going to live with this one, even though it looks kind of like a second grader did it. I'm going to live with it because I think that the stencil is going to save this crummy crummy background. Let's see how it does. Okay, so I like it. I don't love it, but I like it. And if you're far enough away, you don't see any of the bridging problems I had. So two things. One is I didn't register the stencils. Remember how over here I put these white registration marks, and I said, okay, every layer is going to go right over the next layer. Everything's going to be registered perfectly. Well, I didn't do that with this one, and it really shows because I had this purple background, and the purple background is great in that it kind of accentuates the direction her eyes are going, and I thought that was a clever idea. The only problem that I didn't really think about was how the purple was going to show through on the inside of the stencil. If I had left it these bright, happy colors, you wouldn't see these dark purple lines coming through her face like this and under her chin here. The reason why it's hard to fix those is because I used a gradient spray on every single one of these layers of stencil. So I added one spray on top of another. Basically, I painted the skin tones by painting a light flesh tone, and then by painting a very diluted gray or black over it. So all those are kind of gradiented out here. And if I tried to fix, for example, if I tried to fix this line right here, what I would see is that I would get just a spray over a gradient, which would look totally wrong because this is more pink and this is more gray. Anyway, I'm going to leave it the way it is because I'll screw it up if I do anything more to it. But I like the overall effect. One thing I would do is I would also feather out the edges of the bottom of the stencil here, or I would paint something underneath to make it look like, okay, what's the reason why it's there? Or I would make the stencil abut something that supports it, because basically this stencil has all organic edges except for that bottom edge, and that's why I would hide the bottom edge. I would do something there. Okay, is there anything else I would do differently? I would register it properly. I would think twice about making the purple go through the center. I might lighten up the very center of the face, like underneath the stencil. I might remove that purple so that it doesn't interfere with the rest of the painting of the stencil. It doesn't show through so much in those bridged areas. And I would make sure that the bottom doesn't just hang out in space like that. I would make it abut something so it comes up to the edge of an air conditioning vent or something on the wall, so that it doesn't look like she's just kind of like cut off midway in space. The last thing I would do is I would actually cut up this stencil. The way I would probably cut up the stencil is I would do something to make it so that those inner tones of the face kind of build one on top of the other. Because what I don't like is how, for example, in this stencil, this layer has to match up exactly to this layer to make sure those tones are right. So what I would do is I'd take the black layer, put it over this layer, and I would cut everything that's cut in the black, I would cut out of this layer too. That will keep you from getting those places where the two color layers come up right against each other, because you're going to paint this all black anyway. So it might as well be this layer might as well be inside this layer too. That way you get a gradual building up. That's called a ladybug stencil, and that's a topic for another day, but we're actually working on that at Base Stencil to make it so that you can make not just a zebra or a budding stencil, but also a ladybug stencil where one layer builds on top of the other layer. Okay, I'm pretty happy with this Taylor Swift on this wall. I'm going to take a picture of it and send it off to you in a love letter. This is Dave signing off from Base Stencil.